In this video, we'll be looking at how to add a black and white effect or how to apply black and whites in your portrait image in Affinity. So as you can see here that we have an image, and if you want the exercise files or this particular image to work on, then please find the link for the image in the description. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please subscribe to the channel for more tips and tricks related to Affinity. So without any further ado, let's get started. So as you can see that we have the image right here. And first of all, to add a black and white effects to our portrait image, all we can do is simply navigate below to our layers panel, and inside the layers panel, click on adjustments icon. And as soon as we click on adjustment icon, you can see that we can access black and white option right here. Click on black and white. Now, after clicking on black and white, you can see that a new black and white box has appeared right here. And a black and white adjustment layer has been applied on top of our image. So we can further tweak different settings inside this black and white box to make the black and whites effect more natural. So let's start with the red color right here. So I'll simply click and drag the slider to adjust our reds. So I'll click and simply drag it like so. And now you can see that the model's face is looking much more natural like so. I'll keep it at the value of 45% for now. And the next value that we have is of yellow color. So let's adjust the yellow channel. So let's click on this particular yellow slider and simply adjust its value like so. And you can see now that the overall tone and value of the model's face is slowly starting to change. Now let's adjust the red as well again like so to give it a little bit of glow. And now let's move on to our green slider. Let's click on this particular green slider and then adjust it again. And now you can see that nothing is being applied here because there are no presence of green in the image. However, sometimes colors like this or the attribute of the colors like this will be applied slightly or subtly to certain or few areas of the image, and we should be very mindful of that. So I'll set the green to default for now. And now you can see that our image has been subtly affected by the green slider. So let me drag the green slider all the way to the left, and you can see on the left portion of our image in this particular area that it is slightly having an effect there. So I'll simply click and adjust our green slider like so to make it somewhere around or at the middle. So I'll set it to minus 32% for now. And next we have our cyan slider. So let's click and drag to adjust our cyan slider, and let us simply click and drag like this. And you can see at the top of the dome behind the background, the cyan slider is slowly affecting its dome color and making the background even more attuned to our subjects. So let us move to blues. I simply click and drag our blues to the left again like so. And you can see that when we move the slider of the blues to the right, it is making the background a very much brighter, which we don't want. We want the background to coordinate and work seamlessly with the image. So I'll simply drag it to the left like so. And let me keep it somewhere at maybe 21% for now. And I'll leave the magenta as it is, since magenta is not fully applicable in this image, as the image does not have any magenta color right now. So I'll set the slider of the magenta to its default position by double clicking it. And you can see now that our slider has returned to its default position. So I'll simply go ahead and close our black and white box. After closing our black and white box, you can now see that our base of the black and white adjustment layer has been created on top of our image. So if we click on the I button right here to toggle the visibility, you can see this is the before and this is the after. Now, if you want to go or move much more further like professionals, then we can also create other additional layers for shadows and highlights. So I'll click a new pixel layer right here, and this new pixel layer, I'll rename it as highlights, and I'll again add a new pixel layer, and I'll rename the pixel layer to shadows. So this is for the highlights and this is for the shadows. And next what I will do is I'll change their blend mode. So let me hold down the shift key and click on highlights as well. And now let me change the blend mode to overlay. Or you can change the blend mode to soft light or hard light depending upon what you are going to apply the highlights and shadows for. So in this case, I'll select overlay because overlay has a mild kind of effect. And if you're using this particular overlay method to skin tones, for example, then you can use something like soft light because soft light works very much softer in contrast to overlay. And the overall concept of this particular blend mode, you can see here inside overlay group, is that they add a very good contrast to our image. So after selecting overlay, I'll simply click outside of the option to get rid of that blend mode option. Now what we will do is simply click and select the highlight portion first and get rid of the shadows portion. And now let's select our brush tool from our tool panel like so. And by selecting the brush tool, next what we want to make sure is make sure that our foreground and the background color are set to blacks and white because we are working on the black and white to adjust the additional shadows and lightning. So we are adjusting the highlights first. As you can see that we are selecting the highlights layer right here. So we will keep the foreground color to white. So after keeping the foreground color to white, next we'll decrease our flow to somewhere around, let's say somewhere at a minimum value of 6 or 5%. So I'll set it to 5% for now. And now also make sure that you do not have this width option checked inside of the Affinity, because in my case I found that I was having trouble sometimes because of this particular width edges option that was automatically turned on by default as soon as I select the brush tool. So I'll now increase the size of the brush tool like so. After increasing the size of the brush tool, next thing that we want to make sure is navigate to our brush panel, and we want to make sure inside the basics category of brush, you can select any of the soft round brush as you can see here. So I'll select this particular round soft brush type right here with 128 brush size. So after selecting it, I'll go back to our layers panel and make sure that the highlights is actively selected because we are going to tweak and make adjustments to the highlights in this particular black and white image only on the portion of highlights. So now we can simply zoom in a bit, and I'm zooming in by using the shortcut key of Command and plus, and if you're using Windows you can zoom in by using the shortcut key of Control plus. So I simply click and brush over the areas to add highlights. So as you can see in the image, the lighting or the sun rays are coming from the right hand side. So I'll simply brush over these areas like so to make it more lighter or to make it more brighter like so. And now as I've added few of the highlights to the here, now I'll also zoom in like so, and I'll add some highlights to the back of our subject. So I'll simply decrease the brush size and simply paint at the back of our model like so. Simply will paint over extra at the back of our model like so. And now we can also do the next thing, that we can decrease the size of the brush and then we can paint at the edges of the back of the model further. So we can simply paint it like so. As you can see here, we can simply paint it, and we can simply paint it towards these edges as well. So I'll simply decrease our brush size more and then apply some paint effect at these lines at the edges of her sweater like so, and I'll simply add extra highlights like so. And we can also increase the size of the brush again and simply add extra highlights to these areas of her sweater. So if we want to get rid of those blacks, all we can do is toggle it to black color. As you can see here, we have now toggled it to black color and we can simply paint over it like so a bit. So the concept of overlay here is, what overlay does is it simply adds contrast to our image. as we have set the blend mode to overlay. So how does it work? So to understand it, basically, when an image or the area of the image has a certain portion that has more than 50% of white, then in that case, if you are selecting the foreground color to be a white, then it will add the white color. And in the case when an area or the portion of the image or the image has 50% more black colors or has a black color that is more than 50%, then whenever you have selected the black color as a foreground color, in that case, it will apply that black color when you brush over it. So the simple concept is it makes 50% blacker, much more blacker if we brush with black, and it makes 50% whiter areas much more whiter if we brush with light. So these create an illusion and dimension of a contrast. So now let's move on below and apply our foreground color of white to add some highlights to the edges here as well. So I'll simply decrease our brush size a bit and make it much more smaller like so, and make sure that the foreground color is set to white. And now simply click and brush over the edges also like so. As you can see here, we can simply brush over the edges like so. And now I'll go ahead and use our shortcut key of Command 0 or Control 0 if you're using Windows to fit to the screen. And similarly, after we have added highlight, we can also now move to shadows layer and add shadows. So before working with the shadows layer, first of all, make sure that we toggle the visibility on. After toggling on the visibility, for the shadows layer 2, let's adjust the flow value to around 5%. So I'll give the value of 5%. And after giving in the value of 5%, make sure that your foreground color will be set to black color, because we are going to apply some blacks to the shadows to create an overall dimension of contrast. So we can toggle the foreground color to black by either using the shortcut key of X or using this particular icon that you can see here. So I'll use the shortcut key of X or Shift X. So you can now see that our foreground color has been changed to black. Now after changing our foreground color to black, we'll simply brush over the areas where we want to accentuate the shadows. So for that, I'll zoom in first, and after zooming in our image, I decrease the size of the brush, and now I'll simply add few shadows to the areas in order to create the illusion and depth of contrast. As you can see here, I'll simply brush over these areas as well. And we can also further adjust the flow value. And until now, if you're wondering what the flow does, then flow simply refers to the intensity of the color through brush that we are applying. So for example, if we crank up the value of the flow all the way to the right to 100, and if we brush it, you can see that the intensity of the brush color that we have applied is very much at maximum. So I'll undo it by holding down the Command and Z. And if we decrease it all the way below to, let's say, around 11% for now, you can now see that the intensity has decreased. So that's basically what the concept of flow is. Now set the value of the flow to somewhere at 2% for now, because we want to apply the flow to few areas of sweater, which is white in color in this image. So I simply zoom in first and decrease the size of the brush like so. And then I'll simply apply the shadows to these particular areas to add much more depth and dimension. As you can see here, I'll be adding few more shadows to these areas like so. And we can also add the shadows to our shadows line by simply decreasing the size of the brush and simply applying the shadows a bit like so, as you can see here. So these create a dimension. And let me again increase the size of the brush and apply our shadows to these areas as well again. So now you can see that we have added our highlights and shadows to make our model much more natural. And this is how professionals often go further ahead in order to add these kind of effects and make their black and white portrait image much more natural. So eventually, let me select the highlight layer again, and this is the before and this is the after. You can see that adding highlights and shadows has created additional depths and contrast to the image to make it much more natural. and prominent. So we can also adjust the opacity at the end by selecting individual highlights and shadows like so to adjust how much of the shadows we want in our image like so. And we can also play with the shadows like so, as you can see here. So I'll set it to 82% for now. And now this is the before and this is the after. So this has applied much more depth and dimension to our image. So let us see the overall before and after of our black and white adjustment layer. So let me select the black and white adjustment again and click again to our visibility icon. And this is the before and this is the after. So to conclude, this is how you can easily apply a black and white adjustment layer effect to your portrait or any image in Affinity. So if you find this video helpful, please click on the like button, and to get more tips and tricks related to Affinity, hit the subscribe button. Thank you for watching this video and see you on the next video.